Hey, Quest Cohort 21, it's Joe Bailey here. Wanted to go ahead and share with you some of the content that I was hoping to cover in today's class, which unfortunately we're not going to get to because it was snowing. I'm looking outside right now at 2:15 and the sun is out. But we will press on, and I wanted to address some issues with regard to professional development. I know it's very important this week because we have the conference on Thursday night, and many of you are going to get a chance to put on your suits and wear your name tags and network with some alumni and current students and some of our corporate partners. And I will ask that each one of you try to meet at least three people who you think can help develop your professional career. So that means going up to somebody who's got a name badge on, who you don't recognize, and introducing yourself and asking them how they're related or affiliated with Quest. And you may find out it's a parent, you might find out it's a corporate partner, it might be an alum. But I think if you start taking some chances in a very, frankly, safe and risk free environment like this one, I think you're going to find that that's going to pay some dividends later on. But let me share with you the voice of the customer in this case with regard to professional development, because I did some analysis of the information that I got back from Thursday's class last week. And this is actually called the gap analysis. This is one way to look at it. You'll see a graph in a second. But all I did in the two different kind of sections of the survey that I put out there was count how many of you think that you possess some of these skills and how many of you would like to further develop them. So you can think about this in the DMAIC framework as kind of the current state is the things you possess. What you want to develop would be more of the delta, if you will, to get you to what you think you need. And the gap is simply going to be the difference between what you want to develop and what you possess. So, for example, the first one here is about dress and attire. So clearly, cohort 21 considers themselves pretty snappy dressers. And again, who am I to argue with that? I think you all are very good at dressing, and we'll see that in practice on Thursday night. And not only do you possess that, it's the highest ranked of the bunch, but also you see that there seems to be very little interest in helping develop that skill. So all of that material that I had thought about presenting on what type of shoes and the lengths of skirts and where the men should button their sport coat, that's out the window. We're not going to do that because the gap analysis shows that's a negative 29. So for each of the 9 things that I asked you about, I did a kind of a gap analysis. I think the table is one way to look at it. Perhaps a better way to look at it is with what's called a radar chart. And again, you could put this in your portfolio of quality tools. And the radar chart is basically showing you overall the 9 things, the thing that you possess in blue and develop in red. So if we just look at the blue for a second, you'll notice that things that are closer to the origin are things that you don't have, and the things that are farther out are things that you possess. So I think people in general feel they possess a pretty good resume and that they dress pretty well. Things that are closer in, like case interviews, are actually very close to the center and something that you feel, at least as a cohort, that you do not yet possess. And then the red, of course, are the things that you want in the idealized state. So the gap analysis is going to be positive when the red line is farther out than the blue line. And you can see that case interviews, there's a big gap here between the red and the blue. We also have some with some one-on-one networking here to there. So we can use a radar chart to look at this and identify the areas. I'm going to go back to the tabular format just to basically show you what I wanted to present in this video. Case interviews was the number 1, so I want to talk about how to prepare and think about case interviews. I'll then talk about some of the logic puzzles that you may encounter in a job setting, and the third one was networking. So I know there are other things on the list, but I think if we can address the first 3 here, that would hopefully help you feel a little bit better about preparing for the conference on Thursday. All right, so case interview. I put down here kind of the cover of a book called Case in Point, and I've purchased several copies of this book over the years. I always put them in the Quest Lab, but it's a nice read when you have a case interview coming up, or if you want to just kind of learn about the case method and the perspective of the case method from the perspective of the interviewer, I think one of the things that we try to do within Quest is structure the Quest interview process for the new cohort. So in the spring, we'll be interviewing for cohorts 23 and 24, and I encourage you to participate on the interviewer side as opposed to the interviewee side, because you'll see kind of how the case interview can not only be executed, but how you may assess skills and talents based upon the case method. So I've got here a 2x2 matrix, and the 2x2 matrix is just to help you organize your thoughts a little bit. Here in blue, I've got what I need to know and what I don't need to know. And on the y-axis, we have the facts that are given in the case, and then the context or assumptions needed to analyze the case. So I'll talk about the specific cells in a minute, but let me just talk about the axes, because a case interview can be something as straightforward as some data or statistics that are put in front of you, or just a general description, maybe just in words about a company or a business or a technology that has some strategic kind of question that has to be addressed. But at the heart of it, that there usually is a question that's driving the case. And that question becomes very important. And I think when KPMG was with us, they kind of described ways in which you really need to kind of set the problem up by first defining it. And again, very consistent with the D of the DMAIC process of defining what actually is being asked. So be very clear on kind of what the definition of the case is and what constitutes kind of the recommendation or suggestion. So for example, it could be a company that's coming on hard times and what to do. And if that's the general question, I think you'd have to say, well, what do we mean by coming on hard times? Are we experiencing revenue reduction? Are we experiencing loss of profitability? Are we experiencing a hemorrhaging of some of our employees? If there's a technology issue, the question might be is that we have a technical problem in manufacturing where, let's say, the product really hasn't shown to be as durable as we want. Think about some material substitution. So all of these cases kind of have a definition thing that you should really start with and know about it, and think about how you want to take that to what it constitutes a successful recommendation. The second thing is, and probably the most important thing for a case, I think, is the process by which you get from the beginning, the start of definition, all the way to coming up with the end conclusion of your case. And an interviewer doesn't want you, or I think most interviews don't want you to just sit there and think about it for 5 minutes, and then at the end of 5 minutes saying, yes, that's the answer. That's not what they're doing. They're really testing you on the process by which you're going to get there. And the process of first, saying even out loud, let me think about the definition of this and how this fits in. Again, you don't want to get into analysis paralysis because there's only so much time you have an interview, but I'm going to take this as kind of my definition and check with the interviewer to make sure that that's a good definition before you move forward. Okay, so back to the matrices. So here's facts that are given in the case. And people oftentimes dump you with lots of data. And there's data that is very helpful in getting you to solve the case, but there's going to be some data that is superfluous on purpose. These things might be there just to trip you up. Again, in many problem sets or exams, especially over in engineering or science, is you can think about it almost like an algebra problem, where you have to solve a problem for X and Y, and as long as you've got enough specificity and plug all the right pieces of data in there, you can go ahead and solve for X and Y. In a case interview, and this happens a lot when you'll see in 490, is you're given lots of pieces of information that are frankly either not valuable or not helpful or contradictory to other pieces of data, or potentially so full of bias that it's not really valuable, that you can kind of ignore it. And so in a case interview, knowing what to ignore is really important. The other thing is the data that you do need, that you have to analyze, sometimes it's not presented in the best possible format, and usually at least one calculation is needed. So it could be something as simple from converting from Chinese yuan to American dollars, or taking a look at converting from months to years. You could look at, let's say looking at profitability based upon revenue and costs. all these calculations are pretty simple, and in a case interview, they're not going to have time to put you through, let's say, a Black-Scholes model or a Euler's equation or anything complicated, but they will ask you to go ahead and change some of the units. So you kind of have to go back to kind of chemistry class and think about the ways in which you can go ahead and get the right units so that you can do an apples-to-apples comparison of some of the data that you have. But even with all that analysis and massaging of the data, it's very possible that there are some things that you have to make assumptions about in order to solve the problem. And usually these are not numbers necessarily, but have more to do with the definition of the problem. So, for example, there may not be any data about the demand shrinking or growing in a market. And you might say, well, I don't have any information on demand. I think it's important, but I think for the sake of analyzing this case, I'm going to assume that demand does not change or is not affected by the information that's given here. Or if it's a technical challenge, you could say, well, I know one of the challenges that happens with the process of curing polymers is the fact that they need to be autoclaved, and that introduces some problems with the material selection. But I'm just going to not worry about that as I think about some of the material selection. So again, whether it's a technical challenge, a business challenge, a science issue, whatever it is, I think there are things that you kind of have to say are outside the scope of kind of what's there. And of course, if you can go ahead and categorize these things, you're trying to minimize this square right here, which is your blind spot. And almost every candidate that interviews has a blind spot. The question is how big or how small that blind spot is. And in general, the smaller your blind spot, the better off you're going to be. So to minimize that, right, first of all, recognize that there are things that are in these other categories. And also kind of recognize that what's often said is, know what you don't know. So knowing what you don't know puts things over here. But if you say, well, I don't need to know that when in fact you do, then that really constitutes that blind spot. So again, think about the problem from other perspectives. Be creative. Try to stay calm. Hard to do, easy to recommend. But even acknowledging the fact that you have a blind spot because there's no area, and say, I really would want to talk to a colleague of mine to help me with that blind spot, can make some points for you in a case interview. All right, so I hope that helps a little bit with case interviews and kind of my perspective on stuff. Happy to talk with you about this on Thursday. All right, so here's some logic puzzles. This was the second highest in terms of gap analysis of some of what you wanted to hear more about for your professional development. And I'm just going to go through kind of a few examples of things that you might see. The first one is a favorite with computer scientists because they've taken classes in algorithms development. So you have 9 balls, one weighs more than the others. Using a balance, what is the minimum number of weighing? So balance has kind of the 2 plates on either end, and you can go ahead and weigh them. And my recommendation for these things is consider the maximum, consider the minimum, and then kind of go for that. So, 9 balls. If I had to, I probably could take each ball and put it against the other, and if they're equal, then I can eliminate 1 ball and keep moving. So I know there's probably at maximum 8 weighings to go ahead and recognize which ball is the best. The best I could possibly do, I gotta weigh them somehow. And then you say, well, I'm wondering if I need to use the balance at all. Could I just hold them in my hand and feel the difference? And that can kind of show some outside the box thinking and say maybe it's 0 weighings. But then ultimately, excuse me for that, ultimately you can get to a point at where you're looking at some type of intermediate point. And I know for this particular question, the answer that at least I think it is it's going to be 2 weighings. And I'll just leave it at that. We could talk about that on Thursday if you want. The second category, I've kind of talked in class about how many McDonald's there are, but variations of that, how many Metro cards there are, or how much revenue does Rudy's make in a day. These are kind of ways in which you can estimate something based upon incomplete information, or trying to take what you know and extrapolate that up to larger sets of data. one of the neat things they do with these logic puzzles is they might give you a choice of logic puzzles and say, which one of these two do you want to solve? Would you rather answer the question about how many Metro cars there are or how much revenue does Rudy's make in a day? And you could say, well, I really want to solve how many Metro cars there are. And then you say, why? Why is that easier for you than the other one? And it's in some ways, it's a logic puzzle that you don't have to solve. They just want to know why you picked one or the other. Now, this is a bit potentially arrogant, but the advice I was given by somebody was, if they give you a choice like this, which one would you rather solve? To actually start to say, you know what, I'm pretty sure I could solve either of them, and I don't think that'd be much of a challenge. So it would show your confidence in being able to solve them. But if I had to choose one, I think I would choose, let's say, how much revenue Rudy's makes in a day, because, and then you can actually anticipate their question. Again, I don't think Maryland students are in general very arrogant people. I think you use it to your advantage. But certainly if you feel pretty confident that you can answer both questions, I don't see any problem with saying, I could probably answer both of them. So again, take what you know, make reasonable assumptions, and don't make math errors. I think the biggest problem that people have is they think they're being quizzed on math and they forget to move a decimal point or multiply by the number of days in a week, hours in a day, something like that, and that's an issue. If you have to, you could always write things down. The last logic puzzle has to do more with biases that exist, the approach that you may come up with. And the one that I was always asked was, why are manhole covers round? And I said, well, it's the only shape that doesn't fall into itself. And they said, well, isn't there more answers than that one? And I said, no, that's the right answer. I'm an engineer, and engineers know that that's the right answer, and any other discipline wouldn't be able to contribute anything. And that really was a negative for me with that particular logic puzzle. This one is a little bit more or less to do with disciplines and just more to do with biases that we may have, which is a father and son or an accident are taken to different hospitals. The surgeon takes one look at the son and says, I can't operate. This is my son. How could that be? So think about that one for a little bit. These puzzles are supposed to demonstrate any type of bias or assumptions that you may have in approaching problems. Try not to fall into a trap. Try to remain calm and consider how others would perceive that problem. So again, I think the more times you can practice this, and maybe I'll move my Mind Trap cards into the Quest Lab and you can try these out. Okay, the next area was networking. And I did an event a year ago with QSO, a Networking 101, and I handed out a sheet of paper, and it took, I don't know, maybe about an hour for us to go through the whole thing because I broke it down to exercises. But I just want to give you a high-level picture about some of my own insights into some networking basis. And this is just opinions. There's no facts in here. So this advice, you could take it or leave it. So the first thing is to just have good manners. And I know it sounds very simplistic to say good manners make for people who do good networking, but frankly, if you're not a gentleman or a lady, or at least trying to be, that could be very, very negative in terms of your networking. So be a gentleman or lady, be attractive, not necessarily sexy. In other words, you don't want to dress or kind of do things suggestively. You're not supposed to flirt with the people, but your confidence, the way in which you dress, the way in which you smile, make eye contact, listen. The eye contact one, I just want to pick up on that culturally. Americans, when we talk to each other, we'd like to look them in the eye. In other cultures, that could be seen as very much a negative or almost demeaning. So, for example, if a student were to look a professor in the eye, professor is somebody you respect, they'd almost be kind of staring them down, saying, you're a peer and I don't respect you. So you have to think about the context, but again, in general, in America, you want to be able to look someone in the eye, and people have two eyes. So my suggestion is pick one eye and look at that one and don't worry about the other eye. Reminds me of a story when famous quarterback for the Baltimore Colts, Johnny Unitas, was told that he had to hit his receiver in the eye. And of course, he thought he was such an accurate passer. He said, which eye? So do that. Listen. This is something that's easier said than done, but communication skills involve good listening skills. I have a colleague who calls this active listening, but really focus on what the person is saying with their body language, with the words that they're using. Try not to cut them off. Really absorb what they have to say. Don't worry about all the craziness happening around you. Don't kind of be distracted easily and say, who else should I be talking to at this networking event? Next one is be gracious and take a compliment well. So hopefully in Core 21, you're very smart, you're very accomplished, you're going to be doing amazing things. So if people say something about you like, that's a really great idea, or I like that, the right response is, thank you very much. It's not, no, I'm a bozo, I guess I got lucky and stuff like that. That's a self-deprecating kind of way of approaching things, but if you do it too much, it's almost like you're insulting the person who went out of their way to compliment you. So a gracious way to receive a compliment is important. Think about saying hi to someone you've never met. I think the biggest thing here is just to make sure it's brief. Walk up, smile, shake their hand, look them in the eye, and say, "Hi, my name is Joe Bailey. What's your name?" It could be as simple as that. And the other thing is that always leave a conversation on a positive note. So, even if the person is too busy or maybe themselves not a good networker, just, saying thank you very much, I appreciate your time, or it was good talking with you, or nice to meet you, or good seeing you again if you've met them before. Those are always good things. All right, networking via email. Oh my goodness, this is one thing we work on in the scoping class a lot. I would say the biggest problem, you could see it here, it's both in the do's and the don'ts, is be brief and don't send long emails. I think sometimes Quest students try to tell their life story in 4 paragraphs, and at the end of it, they have a very simple question. Americans, particularly, are very direct with their business communication. If somebody can go ahead and help you answer a question that you might have, let's say about your 190 project, it's okay to say, I'm a student doing a research project, and I really would love your help answering this question. That might be sufficient. You don't have to talk about the class, the major, the details about your upbringing, your SAT scores. That might all be superfluous information for them to go ahead and address it. In terms of the do, focus on your audience. Again, remember they're busy. They've got a lot of things going on. Make sure you get in the practice of building and maintaining relationships, and ask open-ended questions. Sometimes people ask questions, especially in email, that have frankly nothing to do with getting to an answer, but more about making themselves look smart. So trying to synthesize 5 different articles in the New York Times in order to go ahead and ask a very simple question. Again, you may come across a little bit more vague or general, but that doesn't mean your audience is going to assume that you're dumb. Try not to be self-centric. Don't escalate relationships too quickly. Don't talk about the fact that you want to go work for their company when maybe you've just met the person and you don't know anything about their company. And don't ask direct questions. And I would say that while directness is a good thing, is you always want to give your audience an opportunity to kind of wiggle out of answering a difficult question. So you don't want to ask them is, given the fact that your quarterly profits have gone down by 20%, how do you find it working in a company with so much poor morale? That's not a good question to ask. But, I read about your company. It sounds like there's challenging times. I imagine that's difficult, is it? And then let them answer. And they might say, no, actually, it's not that hard. I mean, we kind of expected this to happen. We prepared for it. Again, it gives them a chance to save some face. Okay, on the phone, again, be brief again. Try not to talk too much. Make sure you listen. Start at the high level. Start a dialogue. Be very flexible. So the cadence of asking questions and answering questions, it's a give and take with whoever else is on the phone with you. You should never try to monopolize the time and never try to talk for more than, let's say, a minute, maybe 2, before the other person has a chance to go ahead and interject. And if they want to go ahead and ask a follow-up question or get more details, they'll ask you. Don't get into the details too quickly. This is a mistake that I find often with people who are kind of new when doing conference calls. So again, start big picture and then drill down. The model of the keyhole method for writing, where you kind of start broad and then you drill down, is very good, especially since the person you're talking to may, even if you talked to them recently, may not remember. There might have been 100 different things going on in their lives since you talked last. Okay? And again, try not to stay structure or rigid. I think one of the things, frankly, we do very well within Quest is we're a pretty flexible bunch, and that's very good when you're talking to somebody on the phone. So if you don't get through all your agenda items, no big deal. Thank you for your time. I look forward to chatting with you again. When networking in person, this might be a little repetitive with some of the other things, but make sure you listen. Try to be diplomatic and gracious. Common ground is always great. Shake hands firmly. There's nothing worse than the dead fish handshake, which is where you kind of extend your hand out, but you don't have a nice firm grip. And that really does matter and says something. I've actually been in meetings where people have removed candidates from consideration, specifically because they have the dead fish handshake. The common ground is always a neat one. You could probably spend all your time trying to find common ground between you and the person you're talking to, but geographic location, favorite sports team. Again, in the conference, it'll be fun because the people have a shared Quest connection. So sometimes alma mater, major, countries visited. Again, you don't want to spend all your time trying to figure out what common ground is, but if something kind of naturally comes up in conversation, it's perfectly fine to say, in your answer, you talked about the fact that you vacation in Deep Creek Lake. My family and I go out there all the time. We love it out there. And then just kind of see where that goes. Don't interrupt or be assertive. Again, don't be too self-centered. Don't do all the talking. And please do not flirt. Again, being attractive does not mean being sexy or suggestive in any way. So here are things to keep in mind. The person you're talking to also may feel awkward, so don't worry about the fact that you might feel awkward as well. Don't worry about status or titles, and don't be surprised. So you might be sitting there chatting with somebody, having a great conversation, and then they says, I'm Dean Bonivar, Dean of CMNS, and you might realize that, oh my goodness, this is a really very important person at the University of Maryland. Again, just take it in stride. That, oh, it's great. I've heard about you. I'm happy to meet you. Just because somebody is CEO, CFO, or started a company, is a multimillionaire, they're still people, and you're going to get a chance to interact with many of these types of people in your life. So just again, be gracious about it and move on. Don't be awestruck, if you will, or try not to be awestruck. Focus on getting to know someone, not what they can do for you. Again, I think this comes from the self-centeredness or selfishness that you're trying to avoid. But, sometimes a conversation leads someplace, sometimes it doesn't. So it's okay just to basically say, wow, it was really neat to get to know you. And it may turn out they work for a tobacco company, and you may have a family member who died of lung cancer, and you think tobacco companies are the most evil person in the world. That's not the chance, or not the time to, let's say, go and vindicate any bad feelings that you may have. You just say, yeah, that's nice. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving on. Thanks very much. And again, that might be an extreme, but try to work on just getting to know someone. I think you'll find most people generally are very, very nice, and they're usually very excited to meet college students. If you have to guess or estimate somebody's, let's say, name, age, title, and stuff like that, you could guess, but estimate, but flatter them, but don't patronize them. So, in other words, don't walk up to a professor and say, "Are you a junior?" Or don't, because maybe a woman is older, don't assume that she's a parent. It might be a sibling. So just be careful of those things. If you ask questions, and of course I always recommend you do ask questions, actually listen to the answers. Empathize a little bit with the person who's answering it. So it's not just the fact that they have something to say, but that you have to show that you're interested in hearing what it is. Don't just say, well, this is all just to get someplace. This one's hard, but easy to write, difficult to practice, which is don't be afraid of rejection. It's very possible you walk up to somebody and you say, hi, my name is, it's nice to meet you, and they say, buzz off, I don't want to talk to you. I've actually had that happen to me a few times in my life, and it really bothered me at first. I remember I met someone the last day I was working in a summer job, And I said, hi, my name is Joe, and nice to meet you and stuff. And how long are you working here? I've been working here all summer, but today's my last job. He goes, well, you're leaving then. Well, and he used the F bomb, and I was very surprised by that. But again, I guess it's still sticking with me, so maybe I haven't let that go. But if you let that get in the way of meeting additional people and talking with them, I think that's the problem. The last part, and I know this is more than just about networking, but just generally about kind of job satisfaction, professional development. Just be yourself. You really are a fantastic person. We have a whole cohort full of great people, so don't try to pretend to be somebody else. Don't try to sound or look important. Just be happy with where you are, and don't apologize for it either. So there's a lot of people who work with Quest because they want that chance to interact with our fantastic students. So they might be coming up to you. And while I mention that, especially for the conferences, I know there's a tendency to kind of hang out in groups, but if I'm, let's say, an alum and I've come back and I'm here by myself, I'm going to probably find it very difficult to walk up to 7 cohort 21 members. So try to be careful not to congregate into very large groups. Walking up to 2 people is a lot easier than walking up to 7 of them. I'm not saying you have to just stand by yourself the whole time, but give yourself a chance to walk up to some people and say hi, make eye contact. All right, so there's other stuff that was on your list: job fair skills, resume, LinkedIn. Job fair, I don't know what to say other just make eye contact, get a business card, don't visit too many booths. There's nothing worse if you're working at a job fair and the candidate or the potential candidates come up to you, share the resume, and say, "Oh, you work for Bechtel. Bechtel's my favorite job. I came here specifically to meet with Bechtel. That's wonderful." And then 2 minutes later, that same recruiter looks at the next booth, and you're meeting with somebody from a competitor. And it's like, well, I thought you really wanted Bechtel. So try to be very choosy with who you visit at the job fairs. For your resume, I would say that what you leave out is probably as important as what you put in. Again, you don't have to tell your whole life story. It's not a biography, but rather it's kind of a description of the skills and frankly the potential that you have in order to qualify for the job that you want. And finally, for LinkedIn, I know many of you have reached out to connect with me on LinkedIn, but focus not only on the connections but the groups you belong to reduce the number of degrees between you and somebody else. There is a Quest group that we certainly would encourage you to join. And also consider the photo that you have on LinkedIn. This shouldn't be the same photo that you have on Facebook. As I'm saying this, it's very possible that mine is. So maybe I'm not practicing what I'm preaching here, but pick a professional looking photo. It's not time to wheel out the spring break photos and put them on LinkedIn. So anyway, hope that helps. Missed seeing you in class today, but look forward to seeing you on Thursday in class.